Good morning and happy Friday from the RTS family here. Marko and Mike sitting back for a little Friday morning conversation again. There will be some big changes coming. There will be more announcements to follow in terms of trajectory of how we're going to be doing this, but the YouTube channel is still going. We'd love inquiries, love DMs, love emails still. Any way you want to get in touch with us and ask questions. But we might have some changes to the format, who's on it, and kind of how we're going to progress over time, due to some recent happenings amongst the people that were involved. So we will keep everybody up to speed on that as we go ahead. But for now, I think we want to keep this informational, informative, keep inspiring people to get on the wellness journey, get healthy, push yourself, prioritize health, and make it a focus of your everyday living. So not only will we discuss clearly topics of health, but kind of random things as well that pertain to lifestyle, because at the end of the day, environmental exposure in terms of your health affects your mental health, your physical health, and it all matters, right?
Yeah.
Every little piece. Which kind of leads me into something I've been thinking about recently quite a bit. If we were cars, when you're born, should you come with like a warranty, right? So when you get a car, there's a transmission warranty, front to back, bumper to bumper. We'll cover everything, this and that. Wear and tear, normal wear and tear might have to be covered by the person, but abnormal wear and tear is definitely covered by the person, right? Like car accidents, things like that. So if we make that relative to a human, what's your take on how we should respond or start to respond to people's accountability or their personal investment in their health when it gets to the point where they start to lose that and use the system in terms of symptomatic coverage and procedures? Should we put any onus on the individual?
I think it's a really interesting analogy to use as, like, let's just say the automobile manufacturing, because if you think about it, to sell a car in the United States or anywhere, they have to go through this very robust checklist.
Right.
Like, it has to meet safety standards, gas mileage, like all these things have to be accounted for before that car earns a warranty.
Right.
And then to your point, there's certain things that are covered under that warranty. Now, this extra usage or abnormal or aberrant usage
Right.
is not covered. But those are always laid out by this governing body, and it is clear that there's a standard to measure against.
Right.
When it comes to humans, we don't have, and I think it's an awesome, and you've been on the delivery side of babies, so unless something is terribly wrong,
Yeah.
they're just, here you go.
Yeah.
In 2 days, you're walking out with the
Things
baby.
checked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very.
So there's really no true measurement
Right.
of what are we standardizing as a warranty,
Right.
to then measure against when you didn't take care of it.
Yeah.
Therefore, accountability becomes this impossible thing to assign or chase or even define.
Yeah. And the disease that always makes it really obvious to me that we do not have accountability really on the consumer is diabetes. And we talk about it a lot on this kind of interaction, whether it's podcast, YouTube channel, or Instagram. But type 2 diabetics, which is a lifestyle dietary disease, make up about 95% of the diabetics in the United States. So if you think about that, that's kind of on us, right? If you're not born with diabetes and you develop it through poor eating, poor lifestyle, why then should your neighbor or someone else paying into the system be responsible for your, I guess we could call it poor judgment, mistake?
Yeah.
I don't know the exact word because I think there's a lot involved in that, mental well-being and environmental exposures. Who knows what leads to that person not having the right lifestyle? But that's also on the surrounding environment too. So is it the individual? Is it the environment? We don't know, but at the end of the day, the only thing somebody can control is themselves, right? So if you know you have type 2 diabetes and you know you need to stop it, that's not part of the warranty, I don't think. You should be accountable for that, which means then all the medications, all the downstream effect of it, all the subsequent costs to the system, all the subsequent insurance costs. Because why should the rest of kind of society keep that person without symptoms if that person's doing nothing for themselves?
it's funny because it's almost like in a legal situation, the goal is to find fault.
Right.
Because if there's a deliberate damage claim, we then have to find who's at fault for those damages or what percent of those damages are at fault by that person.
Right.
So if you're looking at this lifestyle thing that they can't pay for and they're not accountable to it, and then whoever's paying in the system then has to pay for it, it's like, shouldn't we be able to also choose then who's at fault? I don't mind paying money in to help people that, but then it's like, but who's assigning that money to that person's intervention?
Right.
Some governing body. So they should also be then accountable for that money going to the right place.
Yeah.
Right? So is that not the food industry's fault? Is that not the pharmaceutical company? Like, who's actually saying that money is best appropriated in those places?
Yeah.
Without our explicit
right.
Approval of that money. Like, again, I don't mind paying into the system.
No.
I understand how the system works, but it's like, shouldn't we also be able to say, well, that money collectively should be going to get in front of type 2 diabetes
Correct.
if it is preventable, rather than operating in the rears, which we all know is a way more ineffective way of dealing with it.
Yeah.
So
now, switching topics a little bit, it's interesting because I had somebody come in here a couple days ago, and they're like, I just want to investigate kind of this sort of healthcare. I don't know if I need it. I'm doing stuff on my own. I got this down, right? I know what I'm doing. But they're overweight, really kind of sick under the covers. Like, they don't know what they're doing. How many people do you get in the gym industry or that come in here for pure exercise nutrition that you are like, here's what we should do, and they kind of argue with that, even though they came here for your advice?
I mean, I would say, roughly 30 to 40% of people have an idea that differs from what our presentation of the solution is.
Yeah.
And I guess the best retort is, well, what you're doing gave you that body. What you're doing gave you your health status.
Yeah.
What you're doing gave you
Right.
So, and it may not be a matter of them knowing what to do, but them actually doing it. And I think that goes back to the accountability. Like, how do you actually hold someone accountable to what they said they were going to do?
Right.
And how do you have them face objective reality, which is a pretty good definition of accountability,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you actually face the fact that you're trending in the wrong direction, that you do have poor health markers, that you do have poor relationships with food or fitness or whatever it may be? And that is probably the best way that we can get someone to concede to the fact that they do need help. And I will also say that, like, in this era of information overwhelm, no one's short on information anymore.
Right.
Like, I have yet to met a person that is shocked when I tell them they should eat more fruits, vegetables, lean meats, and exercise.
Yeah.
They're not surprised at the answer.
Right.
They know the answer. They just don't have a solution that gets them anywhere close to where they want to be.
Yeah.
And that's where you have professional experience. It's no different if you went to let's say you're having some financial difficulty and you go to a wealth manager or a financial planner, and he says, oh, I see the problem. Here's what you got to do. You got to spend less and save more. And you're like, no shit.
Right.
But how do I do that?
Yeah.
So again, like, we can use these blanket statements like, oh, you should do more and eat less. That doesn't really help anyone.
Yeah.
At the population level, yes, true. It's not wrong.
Yeah.
It just doesn't help.
Yeah.
And that's where, when you start to go down in more granular or more individual context, you start to see solutions that keep that person from doing that thing.
Yeah.
And again, that's where I think coaching and feedback and obviously environmental factors really help that person move forward in their journey.
Yeah, and I get a reasonable amount in here. There are certain people that sometimes walk in with an intent of explaining what they think they need, which can go either way. After they do that, I can either agree or disagree. And if I disagree, there's a small percentage of those that say, well, that's not what I think. And I think that's pretty interesting, because if you think about biohacking and you are just Googling and learning and trying to figure out what your body needs best without proper training, without professional attention to detail in terms of experience in that field. I always ask these same people, would you ever get on a commercial plane, walk up to the pilot and be like, hey, buddy, male or female, and be like, listen, I've been reading about flying jumbo jets for the past 5 years. I'm really into the airline industry. I know every button, every bell and whistle in here. Watch, I'll tell you, that's for the flap control, right? Shows perfect knowledge of everything in front of them. You would never walk up to the pilot and be like, let me fly this plane. I got it. Why? Because if you take that plane off and crash, it's instant death, right? Instant consequence to poor decision making. The interesting thing in health world is human bodies are so resilient that you can essentially play the biohacking game you think you're doing well at. Your consequence will never be seen tomorrow or probably the next week. But you know what? The sad thing is your consequence in 30 years might be 10, 15 less years of life or poor quality. And it's amazing to me that humans are so egomaniacal in terms of thinking they know themselves so well that they're willing to like play the metabolic biology game with themselves, essentially knowing nothing about health. And it starts to frustrate me because the only reason that ever happened is because the current medical system does not satisfy these people, right? Like if you go buy a Ferrari and the Ferrari dealer treats you like a king, white glove treatment, delivers you the Ferrari, teaches you how to drive it, teaches you all about it, you would never leave there, go online and be like, how do I make my Ferrari better? Why? Because you got white glove service, you're totally satisfied with what you got, and you got the value you paid for. The only reason biohacking is available is because nobody's satisfied with what they're getting at the PCP or OBGYN, right? They're just not. Which leads me into something that's still mind-blowing about that world, especially in the biohacking, hormone replacement, advanced world of medicine, which I don't really like the word biohack because hacking is a hack job, right? Like biohacking is a profession, like it should be done the right way. But the OB, PCP world and urology world still sometimes tells people hormones cause cancer. And I think it's an interesting thing because in medical world, it's very hard to break free from institutional thought. Let's play that into the gym space, right? The old model of push, pull, box gym, whatever. How have you gotten people to transition in terms of the consumership from the standardized model into a model like you give here? And what's the exact model?
The first thing I think of that really speaks to the phenomenon of people being unwilling to ask for help is that they conflate education and experience. You know what I mean? And it's no different than like if I was going to war, I want the sergeant who's been in war, not the general who's read books about war. You know what I mean?
Right.
So and that's the crazy thing about fitness because technically you don't really need a gym to be fit. You know, it is kind of free.
Yeah.
The whole idea of intuitive eating. Most people who espouse the benefits of intuitive eating have terrible eating patterns. There's nothing intuitive now about the world that we live in and the food sources that we have that should be just like, oh, that's exactly what I need.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's why the people who are actually good at intuitive eating are people who have done very deliberate work in the nutrition space, who have counted calories, looked at RMRs, looked at objective reality, and then said, oh yeah, I now know how much protein I should intake. All right, so sorry to get sidetracked on that, but now I think about how we've been able to kind of accommodate people where they're at.
Right.
And the first step is actually building a relationship with the end user.
Yeah.
Is understanding that like we get where they are, we also make sure that they understand where they could be and how we're going to approach that. And some of the things that we discuss, they don't know exist.
Right.
You know, some of the things that we do don't exist on like, you know, like a spreadsheet that they've used for 5 years and they wonder why they haven't changed their bodies or changed their lifestyles. So the first part, like it's almost like if you think about personal training, how much is it about the person? Like you have to address that first.
Yeah.
Right? Before you actually get into the training. Because there's physiology, there's biology, there's neurology, but there's also psychology that comes along with this.
Yeah.
You know, so to create that relationship capital first so that you can get the proper buy-in and trust, and then they actually attempt these things, and then through their own efforts, they're rewarded and then reinforced to continue on.
Yeah.
I think that's really like, again, 30,000 foot view of how we've been able to do it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the longer you're with us, the more things on the menu we get to choose from.
Yeah,
you know, like in the beginning, you're somewhat limited because we have to do these certain things. We have to be a little bit more deliberate with our approach.
Yeah.
But the more experience you get, the more results you get, the more momentum you build. Man, we can do a lot of cool things together.
Yeah, the availability of options becomes better.
Yeah, and there's also something like, listen, I always, like, you've heard me say this, like, there are two basic things that are prerequisites for success. The first one being hard work. I really don't know how you obviate hard work in any pursuit, right? The second thing that really helps is feedback. Accurate, precise, timely feedback, so you can course correct so your hard work isn't wasted.
Yeah.
And I think we get a lot of people that are trying their best to work at their best level, but now we are able to limit that discouragement of when things don't go right, because we shorten the limbo period of like, oh, that didn't work, now we're gonna do this.
Right.
You know, so like it's not 3 weeks of stagnation, it's 3 days, and then we have some kind of intervention or some kind of amendment to the program or the nutrition that garners their next stepping stone.
Yeah.
And that's, again, allows them psychologically to overcome that hurdle of like, why isn't this working?
Right. The gym world is interesting because, well, the health world in general, now that I'm outside of sick care, where I used to just see people sick that then recovered, were like, well, I just got to get through this. And their life had a little bump and then they stayed sick, right? They never really got better lifestyle. But in this arena with preventative care, with gym and nutrition all in one, it's interesting because the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And I think healthcare is one of the most obvious things with that. I've experienced a little bit myself, right? So I've been on this kind of 4 or 5 year current like health journey in terms of going from relatively stagnant to now full-blown 6-7 days a week at the gym and clearly deep in the medical end of it. And the more muscle mass you build, the better you get at exercising, the more frequent you do it. Honestly, the maintenance of it becomes way easier. The more you can eat, the less you have to do outside of here, the less actual conscious attention to it you have to pay because you're doing so much upfront work that the interest just keeps compounding and compounding and compounding, and the rich get richer. Now, people always say, like, you can't change your metabolism. Well, if you foundationally think about that argument, it is horrifically stupid. Because if you want to change somebody's metabolism instantly, just put them on a treadmill. And when they start moving, their metabolism changes. Their energy demands change, their use of fuel changes, their burn of fat, burn of carbs, protein building. So to say that your metabolism doesn't change when you can literally change it in an instant is stupidity. Now, from a nutrition exercise standpoint, do all aspects of metabolic function matter? Meaning the fats, the carbs, the proteins, and how do they matter in terms of your commitment to somebody's nutrition and their training program, and how do you kind of blend all of that together?
Yeah, so the first thing that I would look at is, of course, like, what is the individual trying to accomplish and in what timeline, right? So if it is really like, and sometimes we have to do shorter snapshots to get people, into the system and get comfortable. But like we all know at the end of the day, like the health is not finite.
Right.
The pursuit of health is not limited. Like, it should be a long-term game you're playing, right? So if we think about what do we have to establish fundamentally for them to have the longest runway and the greatest return? And most of that comes down to some very basic things. Like, obviously we talk about muscle mass a lot, make sure that we're stockpiling that. We refer to it as like the 401k of health is your muscle mass, because we know the more you have now, the more you can pull on it from later. And it affects your metabolism the most. So all these other like little 1% differences that we want to change are magnified and amplified by pursuing muscle mass acquisition. The other aspect we want to do is, what can we do from a nutritional support of the lifestyle they want. So
Right.
not everyone wants to be in here 5 days a week training, cool. But they want to be in here 2 to 3 days a week, and they want to run a 5K, and they want to play with their grandkids. So it's like, what do we have to do that's a non-negotiable in terms of energy support,
Right.
so that there is no extra cost of doing business?
Yep.
And then again, we just keep going more granular, so that we can look at the metabolic functions, the metabolic needs, and the metabolic support via nutrition.
Yep.
Right? And that tells us exactly what we need to know, from how much protein to the type of carbohydrate and the amount of carbohydrate. And then, I mean, fat is usually more of an incidental, just depending on their activity levels and the nature of their activity. And obviously hormone production and things of that nature. But for the most part, it's like, if we get them enough protein and enough calories, we can start to be very particular about where those calories come from.
Yeah, and the cool thing for me being in here, which is really interesting, is I will see people day one. Then they start doing this. And months later, we continue to look at labs, right? I've now had multiple people, I don't know the exact number, but a bunch, where they're fasting. So they technically were not diabetics. They technically, on paper, had normal ranges of fasting glucose and hemoglobin A1C. Fine. But deeper, their fasting insulin levels were very high. So they were showing signs of insulin insensitivity, even if it's anecdotally or calculated with a HOMA score. HOMA is an algorithm to calculate insulin sensitivity. Months deep into their exercise routine with good nutrition, fasting insulin levels dropped significantly, and then the delay of the hemoglobin A1C coming down. So we can actually measure the changes in metabolism. And your metabolism would be inversely proportional to those changes, right? So if that insulin level goes down, clearly your metabolism, if we want to look at it as a higher or lower, got higher. You became a higher burner. And the biggest thing on that is muscle mass. And it directly correlates to the DEXA scans. And people who gain muscle and lose fat, their metabolic profile changes drastically. We have the proof, right? Like, we always argue, is it healthier to have excess weight? Is BMI the thing to look at? And blah, 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 blah. Whatever the case may be, it is muscle mass driven. I saw online somebody was posting incidents of obesity in the United States and in the world, and they always use BMI. But I have a lot of people with BMIs that are normal, but are skinny fat. I have a lot of people with BMIs that are obese, like me, but in the teens of body fat percentage. So clearly, your muscle mass matters to body composition. But metabolism, when all is said and done, you can 100% affect your metabolism through exercise, nutrition, and good medical care.
Right, and I think people don't, like, again, metabolism, you ask 100 people, there's going to be 100 different answers of what a metabolism is. So to ask them to influence it in a positive way or a worthwhile way over decades is an impossible ask of them.
Yeah.
And that's, again, why, like, you have to have that rapport and that trust to educate someone to make an informed decision about how they're going to address health outcomes, fitness levels, and all these other features of like what we're trying to do in a comprehensive healthcare system.
Yeah. And then an interesting thing has been happening recently with some of our posts. You get a lot of women that respond by telling me, what am I doing in the women's healthcare sector? So first, blanket question.
Yeah.
If I can't take care of a female, how does an adult take care of a pediatric patient? How does a non-handicapped doctor take care of a handicapped patient? Like, I actually don't really understand that argument, right? Like, the new culture of let's not be segregatory in terms of men, women, all inclusive, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, now you're a guy, you can't take a women. I don't really get it. Do you see that at all in the gym industry?
Yeah, I mean, people will respond in the same way if I'm giving like health advice or fitness advice to women. They're like, well, how do you know?
Right.
And well, part of it is the 20 plus years I've been in the business. I mean, I've worked with probably thousands of women at this point.
Yeah.
I do a ton of research.
Yeah.
I consult with people that are more or less experts in the field. So it's not just anecdotal, but it's a blend of all these things that I'm trying to do, as well as the evidence proven by my female clients.
Yeah.
You know, people like, and there's always this like, how evidence-based are you? So an evidence-based practice was once the gold standard kind of catchphrase, but then you forget that there's practice-based evidence.
Right.
Like you generate your own evidence, and I'm not saying like an N=1 scenario can be applied to everyone, but I have a fairly good track record, most of which because it is an interactive, dynamic-based system that is predicated on feedback and communication.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's just like a dictatorship where I'm
Right.
just telling people what to do, and if it's right, it's right, it's wrong, it's wrong. It's like I'm trying to iterate based on people's experiences with the system and the program.
Yeah, and interesting, I sometimes reverse the thought and say to these women, like, how about this scenario? Father-son relationship. The dad can take care of the son because they're both men, right? Great. Son falls down and cries. The dad's like, don't cry. I never cried as a kid. Son's like, I want to go to school. He's like, you're going to walk. When I was a kid, I walked 3 miles in the snow. I didn't give a shit. You're going to ride your bike. You're going to, right? Dad, son. Now, every once in a while, the mom has to be like, hey, like, you're being a little hard on him. Just because when you were a kid, things were different doesn't mean that now, like, we have cars, we have phones, we have bikes.
Yeah.
Okay. Female goes in to see 60-year-old OBGYN, postmenopausal. Herself, the doctor, is postmenopausal. Never had hormone replacement therapy. Grew up in a society where that doctor in young ages going through perimenopause was always told, well, that's just the deal.
Yeah.
Educated in a medical system where that's just the deal. Prior to even investigations into hormones. Lived through the O2 Women's Health Initiative where hormones were labeled bad, which was a malpractice statement. They completely fraudulently published data. That person is never going to empathize with you, whether you're a female or a male, on you feeling like shit. So if you go sit in front of that 60-year-old OB and say, you know what, I'm having these hot flashes, and she's been through it without any medication, she'll say to you, well, let me tell you something, you're going to be all right. Look at me, I made it, right?
Yeah.
So there's almost that opposite, where I think a younger, even a male perspective, female perspective, who cares, but the newer outside the box way of thinking as a peri or postmenopausal or menopausal female, I think you might even get a better response from that younger, maybe the male doctor, because you know what? I do actually feel bad that you feel like that. I want to help you, and I don't want to try to be like, listen, I felt like shit for 10 years, and now I'm great. I would never say that to a woman because I don't know what that feels like, but I do know it's not fun to feel like they tell me they're feeling. So really, there's kind of this balance, and I always try to imply to these women, like, I am here, and we are here as male, female, child, older, geriatric, whatever, advocates for your health. And our whole goal is to get you preventative care to the point where you never need to have some sort of hospital-like intervention. And this new style of thought, you know, we're trying to promote it through things like this, through podcasts, through YouTube, through Instagram, whatever, but it still gets met with that opposition. And
Totally.
I always ask, really, you know, some of the male providers out there really do have an interest in your health, right?
Yeah.
Like us here. And it's hard too because that generation of doctors that's older, schooled in that kind of 70s, 80s, 90s, and then the early 2000s, still in their minds is stuck on hormones causing cancer. And we really got to break that that trend.
I think it's also interesting, and you can speak to this, just on the division of labor or the different areas of medicine. It's like if you went to the top orthopedic surgeon right now and said, are you doing exactly what was done in 1966?
Yeah, right.
They'd be like, of course not. We have better technology.
Right.
We have better research. We know how, like, everything would be different in that field. And yet when you get to hormone replacement, or let's just use, you know, women's health specifically, it's like, this is the way we've always done it.
Yeah.
It's like, since when? Since the start. And like medicine should be driven by empirical research, data, peer review stuff, like all this stuff, and yet, and we do have that. It's just not accepted for some reason.
Yeah. Now that's right into research for idiots.
Oh yeah.
So we go through a lot of studies there's always publications of research and data and things on Instagram, online, all
Yeah.
over the place. And we want to try to express to people, be careful. Because the headline and the abstract tells 5% of the story. What would be your advice to people like looking at information coming out of the health and nutrition world in terms of exercise?
Oh, I mean, there's so much. I mean, to your point, a lot of people look at the abstract and read the conclusion and they think they know everything. And there's so much that goes into a research study. And if you just look at, well, first of all, not all research is good research. Not all research is worthwhile.
Right.
It could be extremely narrow. And this is where looking at the details of the study itself and how to extrapolate that into any real world scenario is always going to be limited, no matter how good the research is, right? Because you have to look at, let's say, the author's intent, how they actually conducted the research. So if you're not really understanding the methods, the means, the population that they're studying, like there's every piece of the research is critical to understanding how that research applies to what you're talking about, right? So it can't be summarized in just the abstract and the conclusion. You must have some kind of understanding of all those pieces that went into generating the research and the outcomes before you can apply it to anything else.
I sent you something recently. There was a situation like that. Or did I? Oh yeah, this one. What was it about?
I mean, I remember someone sending me something about the carnivore stuff, and it was like the research showed something that proved this person's personal opinion.
Oh
right?
yeah, the LDL argument.
Oh, yeah, and that's
Right.
the one. That's
Yeah.
what someone sent me.
Yeah, that was me.
But it was it the Harvard study? And first of all, so everyone's like, it's Harvard, it's got to be legit.
Right.
False. It doesn't have to be legit. But they're basically in response to something that we said months ago. They were like, well, see, this is what the carnivore diet does. But the research was so flawed on so many levels. First and foremost, it had like 10 participants.
Yeah.
You might as well have done it on one person.
Right.
Second of all, the people who are participated already were fans of the carnivore diet.
Yeah.
So there's like bias.
Right.
You know, so and all these things don't show up in numbers.
Yeah.
And that's why if you just look at the results, it's not going to tell you everything. And you really like this is a profession. Like looking at research isn't for like the casual consumer.
No,
you know?
and data is always left out. Now, I won't use names, I won't mention anything in particular, but as a resident where I did some training, every so often there were times where data sets were like, oh, well, that doesn't really matter, let's use this, right? Well, let's leave it at that. And that happens a lot. And in that LDL study, they were looking at if you did carnivore diet and your LDL skyrockets, will it have a detrimental effect on your plaque buildup? And they looked at hard plaque. They didn't publish the data on the soft plaque. The soft plaque is what kills you. But all of them built up excess soft plaque, so they left that out. And I would beg people, if you are not in scientific literature world and you go read a scientifically written paper, it would be like reading legalese, right? Like a lawyer's. It's completely out of your wheelhouse of understanding. And the other interesting thing you should always look at, aside from not trying to overstep your bounds in terms of what you know, is funding for the studies. So if you look at who pays for a lot of these studies, you'll know where their drive lives and what their true intent is on publishing this article. So if it's funded by a pharmaceutical, they're probably going to promote the pharmaceutical. If it's funded by an academic research center who's maybe in talks with the pharmaceutical to use some pharmaceutical, it'll show its face. Everything comes down to the money, right? So whoever funds these studies usually gets the data they want. It's very rare that you do a study and you're like, oh no, this one didn't work so well, right? It kind of doesn't happen past phase 3 trials of pharmaceutical. So just be weary of that as a consumer. The like I said earlier, it's kind of sad that all this information is just public because it almost confuses people more.
Yeah.
And it disallows them, I think, to truly get out of the anxiety of healthcare, trust people, because there's just so much distrust in the system that now they're going searching for this information.
Maybe one of the best things, like if you really wanted to vet, a quick vet of a research study, look at what the authors' believed limitations are.
Yeah.
Because even if, let's say to your point, they went looking for something, and by God, they found it.
Yeah.
But their limitations are like, yeah, but we could have done this better. This was like, we can't, that is a very revealing aspect of a research study that you have to go looking for.
Yeah.
Which again, usually isn't something that people who see a headline in a newspaper or on Instagram are going to go try to find or seek out.
Yeah.
They don't even know it exists.
No.
So.
Totally different topic. My programming went from, I was doing heavier, lower rep ranges. Now it went into really high rep ranges with some eccentrics, with some isos, and a change in like body part attack through the week. Can you draw that out for me?
Yeah, so we had the prior phase or two phases were what we would call a push-pull legs cycle. So every body part was for the most part siloed. So you had a very concentrated dose of, let's say, a particular muscle group or a movement pattern on one day. You did that 3 days, you took a day off, and then you would have some kind of blended approach across 2 days at the end of the week. We got through that, and then now we're at this full body split, and I thought it would be good, a change of pace, because as an advanced lifter, it's hard to continue to do the same thing without, bearing the risk of some overtraining, as well as you probably don't need to get any stronger per se.
Right.
So finding unique or novel challenges for an advanced lifter like yourself to continue to progress, still make favorable body composition changes, and minimize wear and tear on, let's say, soft tissue or joint structures is always something that I think about. And I also think from the way that the setup is with the full body, you're going to have actually more exposures to similar movement patterns, but across a week. So theoretically, you should be more fresh so that you can push performance differently rather than it being siloed to one day.
Yeah, and it's interesting. What I've found is, and I don't know if it's buildup of strength or cardiovascular endurance, I don't know, but from last few groups of exercises now to this block, my ability to use higher weights at a higher rep right now went up.
Yeah.
Because every set I'm doing, I'm like fresh, which is an interesting concept. Because your buddy Charlie says it a lot. You should rest enough that you can exert maximal effort on every set. And it's almost like I feel like I made it, right? So that I'm still getting the best bang for the buck without driving myself to full exhaustion, where then my next set is like, oh, I know this is a struggle. No. Almost no set is a real struggle.
Yeah.
Till the very end with higher weight, because I'm able to fully exert. But it's an interesting thing because outside of this environment, you cannot do that. And what I really appreciate about it is, back to the metabolism thing, I'm eating a ton of calories. And if even 3 years ago, when I was in the middle of it, still in great shape, if you had given me this calorie load with this cardiovascular amount of exercise, I probably would be continuously gaining weight.
Yeah, possibly.
But now I am so inefficient, but able to produce so much output on lesser sets. I'm eating a huge amount of food, and I can't keep weight on.
Yeah.
So the reason I'm bringing this up, not to use myself as an example though, is without a doubt, my metabolism is different. There's no questions asked.
Well, cool thing is we have DEXs to prove that too.
And if I truly...
I think you just posted your DEX.
Yeah, and if I truly ate what I am eating right now, 3 years ago, there's no doubt I would be in the same physical shape, which is pretty neat. Now, I also want to give a little congratulations to this office and this facility. so far now we have had 3 patients that we have caught with prostate cancer years before they would have ever been screened, who also claim their PCP, their primary care, has never done a digital rectal exam, which is how you check a prostate in a male, or check the PSA. And I'm talking years ahead of the game, right? Like most of these people were due for that, a PSA check in a guy with a family history of prostate cancer. So they told him, when you get to 50, we'll start doing those. Because his dad had prostate cancer at like 70. Full blown, 7 out of 10 Gleason score. Tumor had definitely grown in the past couple of months. The surgeon said once they cut it open, it looked like the inside was a little necrotic, meaning high level growth. And we caught it, right? And essentially saved that guy's life. So the reason I want people to know that is, like, if you actually do prioritize your health, the availability of heading off disease before it happens is here. It's right here. It lives here. It lives in the gym, through exercise, preventing acute illnesses. You get less sick less frequently, building more muscle, building that metabolism, building that immune system. And with the medical screening, you kind of have all bases covered for not ending up in a hospital. But I think that's a really cool thing to let people know. And on the exercise end of things, it is very rare. I haven't really seen anybody in here become like debilitating injuries. Most of it's the other way around, right? The aches and pains kind of go away. So what would you recommend for somebody, say they can't come to a gym like this, or say they can't come to a medical facility like this? What would be foundationally the, say, 3 top things they should do to make sure that they're taking care of themselves, even if they can't get to a place like this?
Yeah, this is kind of where, like, we would definitely divert. Like, there's a lot of talk about longevity, and we're always very careful not to describe ourselves as like a longevity clinic,
Right.
Because that's what the idea of just extending life.
Yeah.
And not that we're against it. It's just that's not really kind of the real mission that we're trying to complete, which
Right.
is how much life can we put into someone's time here?
Right.
You know, so there is that quality of life, the capability of long term that we're looking at, and not just living to 120 or 110,
quality.
right? But if you were really looking at some of the basic pieces of longevity, of just like if you didn't have access, you didn't have these resources, you didn't have whatever, the basic things is make sure you stay at a healthy weight. Right? Like everything tracks back. All cause mortality is greatly influenced by body weight. Like
Right.
one of the biggest indicators of cancer, type 2 diabetes, dementia, all these inflammatory chronic diseases come back to what's a normal body weight,
Yep.
right? So if you can just keep your body weight normal or BMI low, whatever, that's something that you have to do. Now, how you do that, eat lean meats, fruits, vegetables, single ingredient foods, 80 to 90% of the time, and enjoy yourself,
Yeah.
right? Get good sunlight exposure, and probably manage your stress and make sure you get good sleep, 7 to 8 hours. Like if you just did that, you'd probably be all right. And you know, the activity piece, try to walk 8 to 10,000 steps. Like that's what all the research kind of points to. Like it converges on those things. And I use those things because those are all free.
Yep.
Like if you just did that, wherever you are, if you just did that, you're going to be better off in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 10 years, whatever it may be.
Yep.
To extend your life at least relative to what you're doing currently. If you really wanted to do more, then we have to talk about resistance training and some dedicated cardio pieces. If that's something that people are inclined to do it.
Yeah.
I don't try to force that. I hope everyone has some kind of physical activity they just enjoy, so they don't have to be convinced they have to do it. And that could be playing golf, doing Pilates, yoga, whatever, because there's also an inherent sense of community and connectedness, which also is very important to longevity. Like what being alone is,
you die
is
early.
like worse than cigarettes or something,
Yeah.
you know, depending on what research you look at. But,
Right.
but you know, like it without a question, being alone sucks.
Yeah.
And it's not good for your health.
Yeah. And I have a plea and a mission statement I personally have over the next however long it takes, but I think BMI should be gone. BMI should never exist. It's done. It is an insurance billing item. It is a coverage for bariatric surgery. It is a coverage for medical entities. It is a coverage for purely financial situations. And anybody who says BMI is a reasonable thing to go by, I don't think has a clue of what BMI actually means. Second thing is, I think body fat percentage is a reasonable statement. But I don't really like the term body fat percentage. I think we should convert to body muscle percentage. And imagine if these machines spit out like 82%, 88%, 87% muscle, right? So the human brain really likes gaining. Like you want to win stuff. Like you want things to fall into your pocket, right? So imagine if your goal was building muscle. And I know it sounds so stupid, but if you branded it the right way, body mass percentage, and you were, or lean body muscle percentage, and you were gaining muscle, I feel like that would encourage people to do that way more. And then by default, if you're getting muscle, you're probably going to lose fat.
Yeah, you're
right?
getting leaner.
You're getting leaner. So it would be interesting if here we could kind of change the
narrative.
And we are a body muscle percentage based healthcare system where like the more I'm getting into it, muscles are it. Like it sounds so meathead, like bro science, but scientifically deep in the roots of your health, your muscles are everything. Everything. They are metabolically active. I don't think we know a thing about our muscles. I don't think we know a thing about the chemicals released to them. And just like I tell people that walk in here that aren't scientific, I will worry about things you don't even know exist. I don't even think we know what exists in what the muscles do endocrine-wise, because how do you find something you don't know is even there, right? Like if you're using an electron microscope or reagents to find chemicals or organic bio investigations to see what's in there. If you don't know what you're hunting for, those molecules, those chemicals could be right in front of you and you'll never know.
Yeah.
And I do believe, because the health impacts of people in this arena that have built muscle is insane. And I hope in about a year or two, when we have a really good database, I'm going to start putting together numbers on metabolic function relative to muscle mass as a statistic, and I will guarantee you, and I can see it anecdotally already, it'll be a linear progression. It'll be a linear association between muscle mass and your metabolic function and your overall health. It's just how it goes.
If you just had it, like everyone that you sat with, what percentage of the people that you've sat with, talked with, analyzed their blood work, or saw their diagnostics, and you, at the end of the day, if you just said the blanket statement, all these things that we're worried about would change if you put 3 to 5% of muscle mass on.
98%.
Yeah. Like that's it.
That's
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So and I'm not trying to say it's
no, but it is what it is.
Because there's different ways of achieving that.
Correct.
That then again, this is the population versus individual level considerations. But for the most part, if they had all just done that over the course of the last 6 to 9 months, they'd be in a better position.
Yeah. I don't really have much more in terms of topics. I think we covered quite a bit. If anybody has any questions, concerns, send either myself at Lujic_RTS Health MD, at Michael Ranfone on Instagram, Facebook, Ranfone Trading Systems. You can always email us at rtshealth@rtsct.com. You can always email the gym. Our contact info is on the website, www.rtsct.com. The reason I'm saying that is not a sales pitch. I want engagement. I would love people to ask questions, because the more we can educate you on the new version of what's happening, the more you can build trust in a system like this, the healthier you guys will be. And until next week, always a pleasure, and we'll talk to you soon.
See ya.
Enjoy the holiday weekend.